You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We now turn to our Reporters Roundtable for a special end of the year recap segment. Joining us today, it's Brendan Moore with Lee Enterprises and Dave Dahl with WTAX Radio. Thank you both for joining us.
I can't believe you hauled us in on Christmas Eve, you savage.
I did not haul them in on Christmas Eve. Okay, this is being taped on Thursday before Christmas, so it's still pretty close to the holiday though. So I apologize and thank you both for cutting out the time.
Happy to do it.
Anytime for you, Cole.
Well, Brendan, I'll start with you. You also just had your end of the year column run, and if you want to check that out, go to the Pantagraph website or any of the Lee Enterprise papers and see that. But Brendan, when you think, a couple years down the line, when you look back on 2023, what are you going to remember the most about what happened around Illinois state politics?
Well, more broadly, Cole, I think it was a very litigious year. I think we saw from the very beginning, even before the year started, the SAFE-T Act, one of the big provisions, the end of cash bail, was supposed to take effect January 1st. It did not because it got caught up in the courts. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that it was constitutional and eventually went into effect, but it certainly delayed things. And then obviously there was the assault weapons ban, which Senate President Don Harmon previewed even before it passed his chambers, said, we'll see you in court, because everybody knew it was going to go to the courts, and it's still in the federal courts, even though the state Supreme Court found it constitutional. And then obviously there's all the corruption cases happening up in Chicago. And so you have a litigious, kind of a litigious year involving state government and politics on many levels. One thing I did put in the column that a little prediction for next year is I don't think it'll be repeated in 2024. These constitutional challenges often in downstate courtrooms by conservatives who can't win in the legislative process because the legislature is dominated by supermajority Democrats and the governor's a Democrat. They passed a bill that basically said you have to file those challenges in either Cook County or in Sangamon County. So I don't think we're going to see repeats of Tom DeVore and Darren Bailey going to Clay County Court and getting an injunction. But that certainly has kind of defined this past year and even the past previous years, post-COVID. But the word litigious.
Dave, can you remember a stretch of time like this where there were so many legal challenges against the big, policies that came out of this building? Because like Brendan said, it's not just 2023. It goes all the way back to COVID, where this trend of suing the state really started.
No, not necessarily, but all you need is a lawyer willing to take the case. You don't need even one fact, as long as you have a lawyer who's going to go to bat for you. What I think 2023 could be noted for is the Democrats expanding their supermajority in the House, continuing in the Senate with roughly the same numbers, able to steamroll their agenda over the Republicans. And it's certainly a fractious group of Republicans, more so than ever. It's certainly not a cohesive group in either the House or Senate, showing really what the Republicans are like in the state. And nationally, you've got the folks who think that Trump is still president, and you've got the folks who are more moderate who, are finding themselves, maybe up the river, especially come election time. And you've also got Governor Pritzker expanding his national profile. He's given a lot of money to abortion rights groups in other states, getting involved in other states' races. He certainly has proven that he can do more than just govern the state, and we should hold him to that the next time, which will probably be the next time we ask him about it. He says, "Oh, I'm not in charge of the legislature," as if he can't walk and chew gum at the same time. He absolutely can, and he's trying to be a national player, whether he is in the photograph for a presidential candidacy or not.
It's interesting you talk about the kind of split in the Republican Party right now, because like you said, the numbers did not increase for Republicans in this building in the last election cycle. We heard from House Minority Leader Tony McCombie during filing day. We asked her what her aspirations are for the next election cycle, and she said she wanted to gain 5 seats. We asked for the logic behind that number, and she had said it was her lucky number. Obviously 5 is some number they're interested in, but it's interesting to watch them try to gain that ground while also trying to hold their party together. That's something you typically would expect from a much bigger party, from the Democrats in this case. You have a lot more members, you have a lot more ideologies in the room, and you have that supermajority power. We've seen some issues with that, but to see the Republicans have to deal with it as much was really an interesting development for this year, and sort of a microcosm of what was happening on the national stage.
Really, the party's just eating itself.
And why, and when did you really start to see those effects of it? Was it the 2022 election, or do you think it was kind of kicking in before then?
Oh, before that, you've got people who are hesitant to align themselves with President Trump, with then President Trump, but Republicans are realizing that if they don't, they're not going to have a seat when the music stops. And you look at someone like Adam Kinzinger, he called himself politically homeless. Now that he is not an office holder, the Republicans, frozen him out for acting against Trump. Again, you've got the folks who are far to the right. Someone like Jim Edgar wouldn't get elected today. You'd have Darren Bailey following around calling him a pinko. And as for Bailey, he's now trying to paint Mike Bost as some kind of establishment lapdog and trying to take him out in a primary in that congressional seat in Southern Illinois. And you wonder what Bailey's long-term plan is, if he has one, because he wasn't a representative very long, because he was running for Senate. He spent his Senate time running for governor. He is not governor now, and now he wants to be a congressman. So where's it, what's his end game?
Brendan, we saw a lot of interesting dynamics with the leadership in this building this year. Obviously, we had Tony McCombie taking over in the House. We have Senator Curran leading the Republicans in the Senate, and we have Don Harmon and Chris Welch at the heads of the both chambers, and then Governor Pritzker, obviously. And in the Senate, we heard towards the latter half of last session in the spring, we're both working on the budget. This is good news. We're working on this in a bipartisan way. That fell apart at the end because of Republicans saying it was the Investing Kids Act not making it in was the big break for them on the budget, why they didn't want to put any votes on it. And then in the House, we saw just no cooperation between the two sides. And I wonder what your thoughts are on, especially looking ahead, how this is going to keep moving forward. It doesn't look like we're going to have any leadership changes or anything like that, but how do you anticipate these relationships evolving as we see the infighting, I guess?
Yeah, I think the different dynamics between the House and the Senate reflect the, differences within the makeup of each caucus. In the Senate, the body's always a lot more collegial. Senators represent bigger districts, some would say more moderate districts, whereas in the House you get some more of the extremes. Obviously, in the Republican side, you have a lot more from very conservative districts, some more of those Freedom Caucus members, on the far right. And then obviously among the Democrats, the Progressive Caucus has really grown to a point where they can flex some real muscle under the dome. So I think that Republicans had a little more leeway in the Senate because senators, I think generally, we see this at the national level, they want to be a little bit more bipartisan, collegial, working together. Whereas in the House, I think Speaker Welch and the leadership had some more membership management was more of a priority for them, making sure that every aspect of the caucus, whether it's the progressives or the moderates, felt like they were heard. And generally, Republicans have different ideas about what's good in a budget. So I don't think that was really a priority for them to include them because, quite frankly, they don't need them. They don't need that, and that's the conundrum for Republicans moving forward, is that they are in super duper minorities in both chambers. Democrats can, as Dave said, steamroll them on anything they want any given day, Not that it's easy, because as we've seen, sometimes the internal dynamics within the caucus are messy, and usually at the end of the day they come together, but it's not that Democrats automatically have 78 votes in the House or 40 in the Senate, but more times than not they do, and they don't need Republicans. And I think moving forward, that's going to be, as we move into this election cycle, something for, Republicans especially to think about. Going back to that last conversation, the electorate that Republicans need to win a primary versus a general election, those are very different electorates, and they have not been able to thread the needle for the past several cycles, and they're going to have to thread that needle if they want to win again in Illinois. But that's a hard thing, especially with former President Trump still the dominant figure in the party and probably going to be leading the party at the top of the ticket in November. So I think that's going to really be hanging over a lot of this, and I think will probably hurt Republicans, especially up near Chicago, in the next election cycle.
Dave, how do you anticipate the primary? And we're back to a March primary this year, and this is, next year we're at a March primary. How do you anticipate that kind of affecting these already kind of tenuous party relationships? Obviously, there's going to be a few primary races for some of the Democrat members in the House, but when we're talking about especially the direction of the Republican Party, where do you see March kind of affecting the rest of the year there?
Well, I'm not sure about that. As you asked the question, I'm trying to think of what races are contested besides the Bailey Bost race for Congress in Southern Illinois. It'll be interesting to see who aligns with the folks who are not Trump, those who are vying to be the top alternative to Trump. I think people ought to get used to the idea that Trump could very well be back in the White House after the 2024 election. I don't sense a lot of enthusiasm for President Biden, as a candidate or as president. It's like the last time, the biggest thing he's got going for him is his name is not Donald Trump. And so I think those dynamics could be pretty interesting, maybe broader outside Illinois, because this is not a battleground state. But one thing to keep in mind too is that legislature is not scheduled a great deal of session days in 2024 prior to the March 19th primary. There are only 3 days in January that they're going to be here, and so they're going to be out campaigning.
And Brendan, I want to go back to you real quick for just one last question about these dynamics around the entire party, especially with the Democratic Party here. And especially since Pritzker has taken over, the years have been defined by pretty big, splashy pieces of policy. And every year you start to think, is there another one to come down the road? Like, what could they do now? And then they come up with something like an assault weapons ban that keeps everybody in the courtroom for an entire year. And with an election year, we could see, maybe not resting on the laurels as much, but like Dave said, they're not going to be here a ton before the primary. There's still going to be a lot of campaigning going on even in the early days after that primary. Is it time for a slow year?
Define slow, Cole. No, because even this year, which after the assault weapons ban, which was in the lame duck session, was not in the spring session. I mean, even that spring session still had, I think, 550 bills that passed and were signed, which was still a remarkably effective year in terms of legislating. But no, I think in terms of election years are usually a little bit lighter on policy and a little bit heavier on politics. Legislators, like Dave said, like to be back in the district campaigning, whether it's for the primary or, and then after that, not rocking the boat too much with potentially difficult votes. But I do think that there will be maybe not the splashiest, policies that we've seen with an assault weapons ban or Safety Act or whatever. But one thing to watch, I think, is a constitutional amendment to codify abortion rights in Illinois in the state constitution. Democrats have been talking about it for years. They've obviously taken policies they've enacted policies legislatively to make Illinois a very strong pro-choice state. That's not going to change no matter what, but getting a question on the ballot will bring out voters. They know this is an issue that moves voters, particularly in the Chicago suburbs, and so do not be surprised if the supermajority Democrats vote to put an amendment on the ballot this spring. And as they did with the Workers' Rights Amendment last year. Again, it doesn't do much to change the existing policy. They would argue, well, we're not going to be here forever. Governor Pritzker's not going to be here forever. There could be another, Republicans could take power someday and reverse all our policies, so we just want to enshrine it. I think most people would say it's a very politically convenient answer, and it helps them more electorally than it would, in terms of changing any policy.
We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll return to our Reporters Roundtable, where we will talk about some of the key policies that were passed this past year. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We're still here with our Reporters Roundtable going over all of the events of the past year. Joining us, it's Brendan Moore with Lee Enterprises, Dave Dahl with WTAX. Thank you again for joining us. Let's start going through some of these big policies. We've already hit on a lot of them, but Dave, the assault weapons ban, probably tied with the Safety Act for the two biggest policy discussions to happen this past year, mainly because those just remained in the courtroom for seemingly ever. The assault weapons ban still there, possibly going to the U.S. Supreme Court. What have you thought about how this has all played out as we're, a week away from the registration deadline kicking in for that bill?
That they're not ready for, that they're absolutely not ready for. They don't have the rules, they don't have the, they don't have the infrastructure. People who are experts on gun advocacy say that the state has done, that is the administration has done the state police no favors by saying, here, run this, and arguably not giving them the infrastructure to do it. It's yet another case where any attempt to do anything to curb the spread of guns or to do anything in response to, in this case, the Highland Park shooting is seen as an infringement on the Second Amendment. You see, for example, Sandy Hook. I told Rodney Davis that those kids were from rich white families, probably a lot of Republican votes, and it's still happening. And Congressman Davis, now former Congressman Davis himself, got shot at on a baseball field. His Republican friend, Steve Scalise, who's still a congressman, was wounded, and it's still happening. So the people who are the bad actors in this continue unabated. And so Representative Morgan, who says he was stepping across dead bodies on that July 4th, or dying bodies in the July 4th massacre, Highland Park being part of his turf. And by the way, that sniper acted in a place that as a parade was crawling with cops. So he wanted to respond to that, and obviously the people who were in favor of preserving the Second Amendment are absolutely not here for it. So it continues, and as we know, the gun debate in Illinois is one of the few things in Illinois that is not partisan, it's regional. Chicago area versus everywhere else. Downstate, we hunt, and we want to protect our land. And so I think that ban is going to be, a difficult one to survive the courts. Nobody wants there to be snipers at parades, but nobody wants something that presents itself as infringing upon their rights. And we could talk until we're blue in the face. I'm not sure what color we are now. The framers of the Constitution may not have had assault weapons in mind. They may have been thinking more of muskets and bayonets. And you could also argue that the people who own guns now are not a well-regulated militia, something else they talked about. So you got to wonder if there ever is going to be a middle ground on this. And meanwhile, it all continues. It's just as close as the next headline.
Well, I was going to just add to that, Dave. I mean, I think a big thing to remember here is that Illinois was the first state to pass an assault weapons ban after the Bruen decision by the U.S. Supreme Court a couple of years ago, which was an unrelated gun case, but basically the Supreme Court changed the the test for constitutionality for Second Amendment cases. And so Illinois potentially could be the, test case of are assault weapon bans constitutional under this new test. And clearly the Supreme Court, this is probably going to the Supreme Court. I think most people acknowledge that, whether it's this year or the following year or whenever, the High Court of the United States will have the final say on Illinois' ban. In the meantime, just to give some context, I believe there are, 2.4 million FOID card holders in Illinois, rough estimate. I haven't checked the latest registry data, but the number of people registering their weapons was in the low tens of thousands. Very, very, very small percentage of people holding FOID cards. Not saying everyone with a FOID card owns one of these banned weapons, but I'm sure it's much higher than the 10 to 20,000 who have registered. So I think compliance is going to be an issue. Enforcement's going to be an issue. We already have, 90 plus sheriffs on the record. Maybe that might be a high number, but a lot of sheriffs saying we won't enforce this. And so I think that obviously they can't be sold in gun shops anymore. That's a big thing. But in terms of people that hold guns, I mean, Darren Bailey said it himself. You can come to my porch and take them from my hands if you want, but I'm not giving them to you, and I'm not registering. And I think that's the sentiment of the vast majority of people that hold these weapons in the state.
It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out from January 1st on, because they're going to implement new rules maybe in January. They kicked the can down the road at the December JCAR meeting. They're going to discuss the permanent rules for the registration program that are going to be put in place after the registration deadline is supposed to go into effect. There's still tons of questions and tons of clarifications that are going to be put out about what guns, what attachments need to be registered in the state. And then you have, like you guys both touched on, a population of gun owners who, if they don't have to, they don't want to register their guns. And that's the question of the infringement of rights, Dave, that you hit on. So it's going to be interesting, as this has been kind of presented as this hard deadline, to see the patchwork kick in the new year. Because Dave, you already hit on it. This is not, and we're not going to hit January 1st, and then all of this is going to be wrapped up and over. There's going to be tons of questions about it. There's going to be tons of legal questions about it and enforcement questions to come on that particular topic. That wasn't the only one, law that was in the courtroom. Brendan, you talked about it earlier, the Safety Act. Finally, that saga ended. The cash bail went into effect. We've heard from sheriffs across the state, jail populations are down, but the overall, first wave of data that we're expecting to see has not been released on exactly how this is working yet. But it's interesting to see how quickly all of those conversations really died down after that mid-September day when cash bail was suddenly gone.
Let's put it this way: the purge did not happen. All the hysteria about how crime's going to go way up and it's going to be anarchy, you name it. That didn't happen. And maybe you can say part of that was because we had more ramp-up time, thanks in part to some of these challenges. I believe September 22nd or sometime around then was when this actually went into effect. I know we had reporters in the courtroom kind of observing how this was all going, as other outlets did across the state. And yeah, there were some hiccups, and there's still some hiccups, but at least from the reporting of my colleagues, in Macon County and McLean County, it's gone fairly smoothly. It's doing what it was intended to do, lowering the population of people incarcerated, waiting for trial, and not, again, we have to look at the data, but at least apparently not having a huge impact on crime. So again, it's only been 3-4 months, so we have to wait and see for more data. But I think it's safe to say, though, that this was not the disaster that many people thought it would be.
Well, those people, Brendan, may have underestimated, it's early, but they may have underestimated the ability of the prosecutors and judges to, have a lasso on those people and have a lasso on the truly dangerous people and have them do the best they can to predict which person is going to go out and, commit crimes after they run out of jail. And the people rushing out of jail to, rape and pillage the community, I'm not sure those people really exist. And on the other side, the single mom who's jailed for shoplifting a pack of diapers, I'm not sure that person exists either. It's probably somewhere in the middle. That's not to say there won't be something happen where, there'll be some criminal and then it'll say, oh, and this person was let out because of no cash bail, et cetera. Again, a lot of it is predicting which people are going to be at risk.
And I will say just very quickly that a lot of eyes are on Illinois right now. Illinois was the first state in the nation to do this entirely. I mean, there have been some states that have scaled back cash bail, but Illinois is the first to entirely eliminate it. So I think a lot of people around the country are interested in what's happening in Illinois right now. And I think in looking to next year, we could see perhaps, other states, especially other states with Democratic legislatures and Democratic governors, maybe look at this and look at Illinois as a model for how to go about ending cash bail.
So I said we were going to talk about policies, but instead we're going to just talk about courtrooms, I guess, because the last thing I want to hit on before I let you guys go, all the corruption trials that have happened this past year and all of the corruption trials to come. We had Tim Mapes, we had the ComEd 4, we had Ed Burke going on right now up in Chicago, and maybe next year we have the trial for Michael Madigan, former House Speaker. We have some challenges being thrown out there now that could possibly delay that hearing early January. All sides are going to be coming together for that conversation.
Well, and also delaying the sentencing for the ComEd folks.
Yes. At the same time, there's a conversation of, possibly challenging if what they did was even illegal or could be changing if it was illegal or not. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. But everybody is patiently waiting for that trial or impatiently waiting for that trial. And when that finally starts, what kind of impact do you think the trial of Michael Madigan is going to have on this building? Because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that sit on the right side of these chambers that are going to be very excited to talk about that when it comes around.
I could be totally wrong, but I don't think it's going to have a huge impact, to be honest with you. I mean, Republicans for years and years and years tried to make Michael Madigan a boogeyman and, make him the face of Illinois Democrats and use that to try to attain electoral success. It hasn't been successful, even when Madigan was under the cloud of investigation in 2019, 2020, and afterwards. And maybe it will be different with him actually in a courtroom and with that drip, drip, drip every day of stories. But quite frankly, I feel like there's a lot of people that just kind of tune that out. And I think that, it's scheduled for April, I believe, is when it would start, which means it would kind of coincide with the end of legislative session, which would be interesting timing. It's kind of how the ComEd 4 trial happened this year. But I think that in terms of in this building, I think a lot of people have moved on. As Dave knows, there's a lot of new faces in the Democratic Party here. There's a lot of them that have not served with Michael Madigan, and which is crazy because he just left, 3-4 years ago. So I'm sure it'll be some bad headlines for Democrats, but by the time election time comes around in November, I don't think that's going to be top of mind for voters.
I think I mostly agree with Brendan. The turnover has been pretty swift here, and there's been turned over among the Republicans too. On the other hand, depending on what evidence we have at the Madigan trial, if there are recorded conversations, people are going to be, trying to out Mike Madigan each other. Oh, he was on tape talking to Madigan. Oh, he was talking. Well, of course they were talking to Madigan. He was the Speaker of the House. He was, the top Democrat in Illinois for many years. So we'll see how far that goes. We'll see if there even is a trial. We'll see if they get a delay or if they drop it or just what. And I certainly don't think a conviction of Mike Madigan is certain. You've got different lawyers, different judges than in the other cases. So I guess I'll believe it when I see it with regard to a trial. And when they indicted him, I did text Aaron Schock and say, did Madigan call you and ask for your attorney's phone number? And this may be almost exactly the same thing, where the worst they get Madigan on is a guilty plea to jaywalking. I am not putting all my chips on any conviction of Speaker Madigan.
And to the timeline, I mean, we're talking about the Ed Burke trial right now, which is ongoing, could have a verdict, may have a verdict by the time this airs. Ed Burke was indicted in 2019, and it's 2023. So anything can happen, a delay could happen, several delays could happen, or he could go to trial next year. We will just have to wait and see.
Well, Brendan, Dave, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for letting me keep you around for so long.
Yeah. Merry Christmas.
Cole.
Write 24 on your next 10 checks.
Oh, gotta get ahead of the game on that one. Well, Merry Christmas to you both as well. Happy holidays to all of you watching, and we'll be right back.